We Seek Wisdom podcast. We are looking at taking another sample from the new book, Simply Garlock, that'll be coming out soon, or may already be out by the time you're hearing this. We're in the last little bit. Yeah, it's almost done. A couple of pieces left, and then it'll get published. But before we get into this next sampling from the book, let me remind you to, if you haven't yet, please click that subscribe button and give the podcast a thumbs up down there, and then let friends, family, folks in your church know. Especially musicians would probably find the phonohymnology that Dr. Garlock has developed, find that interesting and helpful in their own study of hymns and in music. But let's not delay anymore. What are we talking about today?
We're talking about one of the best hymns that Florentine and I ever wrote.
Yes.
It's called Searching for Wisdom, and we want to give you the background of it. Again, we can tell you why we wrote it and what the occasion was, which is something special, I think, that you can have.
Yes.
And I hope you use it as a keepsake. At the time of its writing, we were teaching the summer master's degree program at Pensacola Christian College, along with Ray and Ann Gibbs, and that's where you were part of that back that time, which is very interesting to me. We had about 400 students who applied for the program.
That's great.
Only 100 of them actually got through it, because so many of them started. When we started that program, they thought it was going to be a Sunday school program. I said, this is going to be a master's degree.
Oh, yes, it definitely was.
So only 100 of them got through and made it. But there were some that actually did. You were one of the ones who did. The Hortons, Arlen and Becca Hortons, asked me to be on the board of directors at our second board meeting, which I was on for 18 years. And they inquired whether we'd be willing to write a hymn especially for the college.
Good.
I went to work on it right away.
Good.
As soon as they mentioned I was writing the lyrics for 4 stanzas. Florentine started harmonizing my melody and the vocal parts that I'd already begun. Her touch of musical genius appears vividly in the word painting and coloring she added to my ideas, even in this hymn. Measure 1 introduces our first archetype. Now, we talked about archetype before, as it stays on one chord. You say, why would it stay on one chord? That chord happened to be the tonic, which is what we call it.
The one chord.
The one chord, yeah, okay. Yep. Much like when we remain in the same place trying to discover what we're seeking.
Yeah, looking around.
The more you study, the more you try to be a scholar. And I'm not a scholar, but I try to be one.
Oh, yeah.
And the more I realize that you stay in a love, it takes a long time, and it's hard work, and you have to stick with it and keep going. And I have to go to all my books. And I was thinking about that this morning. I wonder how many thousands of books I have. I have libraries back up in Greenville, in Majesty Music, at Shelley's house. There are some of my books along with Ron Books. I have a library here. I mean, everywhere I turn, I have books.
Yes.
So that a lot of times you spend time after time looking it up, and you get this book, and then that sends you to another place, and you just keep seeking it. So that's why we stayed on that one chord all the way through deliberately. That was not an accident. Then measure 2 uses the motion of parallel 6. An interval of a 6, that's another archetype, between the bass and the alto to portray the importance of wisdom.
Yes.
Because the first line, as you will see, is searching for wisdom.
Yes.
So that portrays wisdom. Our own knowledge, displayed by the soprano moving up the scale at interval of a second, is not enough to portray wisdom. Just going up the scale a little bit, that does not come completely. You've got to get more than that. Wisdom and knowledge are 2 different things. Wisdom only comes from God.
Exactly.
We all need wisdom from our omniscient God. The use of both parallel and contrary motion in measures 3 and 4, then, between the soprano and the tenor, and then the alto and the bass, represents the striving that usually accompanies learning.
Oh, yes.
A lot of people, we all want to learn, right?
Oh, yes.
But we don't want to go through the process. But you've got to. If you really want to, searching for wisdom, striving for truth. It'll take some striving. You say, well, I'm going to be a Bible. I was just looking at something. It was on television, and people were talking about the Bible. And a lady got out a Bible and started at the beginning of Genesis, and you couldn't find what she was looking for, of course, because you don't find it that way. You've got to if you want to be like a biblical Christian, you've got to take the time and study, and you'll never learn it all.
Oh, yes. Always
in measures 5 through 7, the strong descending bass melody, followed by an octave leap leading up to the F major chord, sets up the 5 chord in measure 8, which graphically colors yielding to God the strength of our youth.
Yes.
That's why it goes to an F major sound at the right point to point that up. In measures 9 through 10, seeking for knowledge, which takes patience and persistence, is appropriately pictured by the repeated chords, just as mastery of concepts takes repetition in our repetition. In our education.
Yes.
You say, I learned this one thing. You better go back and go over it again.
Oh, yes.
And one of the things I found, I'm sure you found too, Tim, is when I teach it is when I learn it the best.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Teach it to somebody else, you'll learn it better.
Absolutely. Then
this contrasts in the contrary motion between the soprano and bass in measure 11 for standing for the right. That's where you get a contrast, which takes the strength of character.
Yes.
You say, does it take strength to have character? Yep. You better ask God for the strength. The deceptive half cadence found in measure 12 prominently highlights the word right in the first stanza, but also highlights an important word with the phrase of every stanza. Explain what a deceptive cadence is. What do we mean by that?
So you're very used to hearing, and whether you realize it or not is not important, but you're used to, at the end of a hymn that you would sing in church, you hear a authentic cadence, which is the 5 chord of the key going to the 1 chord of the key. And there's many reasons why that progression wants to happen, and it just feels almost inevitable in a way. So when you come to that point, you build up to that 5 chord. Instead of going to the 1 chord, you usually go to a minor 6 chord. It shares 2 of the same notes of the 1 chord, so it almost sounds like you made it to tonic, but there's a note different in the chord, thus it's deceptive. So it kind of sounds like tonic, but not really. And you've probably heard this several times as well in church, because a lot of times this is used by an arranger or composer to indicate, I want to repeat this thought one more time. Like you were just talking about how necessary repetition is for learning. Let me give you this truth, this principle I learned from God. Whatever is being emphasized in the song, they'll use that deceptive cadence to set up, I'm going to repeat this one more time to make sure you get it. And you used it, you and Flora Jean used it here as well.
So here in measure 11, we use that for standing for the right.
Yes.
And that puts you off to a different place.
Yeah.
And that was Flora Jean's idea, by the way.
Such a beautiful moment.
I wouldn't have thought of that. I had to take it right back to the tonic chord, the 1 chord. She took it someplace else to say we're standing for the right. And you don't always find the right the first time.
Yeah.
Sometimes you got to keep going back up.
Yeah, very true.
The musical progression in measures 13 and 14 then accurately points to the ultimate source of all wisdom, and that is Jesus Christ. And boy, does that point that up. And measures 15 to 16 invites anyone who knows him to bask in his glorious light.
Yes.
And I was just thinking about a song this morning. It's not one of our songs. I come to the garden alone. A lot of people say that's not a good song. You know why? They don't know God. And he walks with me, and he talks with me, and he tells me. And by the way, you don't just talk to God; you let God talk to you.
Exactly.
And that's what really fellowship is with God, and we need to do that. And that's what this song does. It points up the fact that Christ is inviting us to be his friend. And I like one of my songs that you'll find it in this book, and it's called He's My Friend.
Yes.
God actually wants to be our friend.
Yes, he does.
So it should also be pointed out the archetypes used in this hymn not only fit the 4 original stanzas included here, but also the 7 other stanzas I had to write for this piece, because Pensacola Christian kept growing and growing. By the way, how many students are there now?
Well, it could be I'm pretty sure it's over 4,000. I don't know if I've
Somewhere
heard a number
between
recently,
4,000 and
but
5,000.
probably heading up to 5,000.
If you
very
take the
quickly.
Becca program,
Oh yeah, there's so many in the Becca program. Right now.
over 30,000, if I remember right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing where that has come, how God has opened that up,
Yeah.
and it has influence all over the world.
Yes.
And and you're like that about this song. My having been a part of that from the very beginning
Yes.
is exciting for me, because also those other 7 stanzas, as the college grew, became their hymn for 41 years as a recessional for the growing college commencement programs.
Yes.
Not only that, as the graduating class each year, several more stanzas were needed to accommodate the exciting of all the faculty and graduating seniors. Students also sing this hymn at the beginning of each student body assembly. I didn't know that.
Yes,
They've been doing that for 41 years.
Yes.
And that's a song I wrote, 40-some years ago. I want to personally thank Dr. Troy Shoemaker,
Yes.
president of Pensacola Christian College, for his kind permission to include this hymn
Yes.
in Simply Garlock, the book you're going to be getting.
Yes.
Under his leadership, the college continues growing, producing young men and women of character, working in many vocations who reflect Christ's love to the whole world.
Yeah. Because they're searching for wisdom, they're striving for truth wherever God has them planted throughout the world and whatever they're doing.
And God must have given me those words, Tim.
Yeah.
I know I was studying the Bible. I went to the Word of God to try to find, Lord, what do we need? If this college is going to be what it should be, what do we need? And so God, I said, Lord, you help me. And I'm sure I look at the words, and if you look at the words, you'll have to say, Frank Garlock couldn't have written that. I said, I like what, I forgot who the composer was, but somebody asked him about one of his, he said, God and I wrote it together.
Oh, that's good.
So I like that. God and I did it together.
Good. Good. Well, I trust you found this a blessing as I did. And if so, as I mentioned earlier, please share it with friends and family, musicians, folks in your church, whoever you think would find this a help and encouragement to them. And thank you so much for tuning into the We Seek Wisdom podcast.